You are going to go on some wild adventures if you decide to start a business in 2026. It's that time of year again. The leaves are turning brown, nights are drawing in, and Christmas music has started to play in every major retail store. You're drawn to cozy knitwear and pumpkin spice lattes. And your ever-busy schedule is being interrupted by your daydreams of a different life. One where you wouldn't have to stand in the swirling rain, waiting for the bus, only to make it to work, soggy, cold, and working to fulfill someone else's dreams. Whether you are looking to supplement your current income or jump 2 feet into a business, I can help you to overcome some common challenges. In this video, I'm going to give you a toolkit, one that you can use to decide whether or not business is the right path for you, how to decide which business ideas might fly, and some tips to help you get practical so you're ready to take action in 2026. It's honestly what I wish I had the first time I started a business. It's not about the hustle, it's about working smart, with a view of an exciting horizon, but keeping your feet planted firmly on the ground. After all, we have to start from where we are. I'm Dr. Becky Sage. I've run my own businesses, and I've also worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs who have made billions of dollars and a lot of impact in the world. But they've also had lots of challenges that we've worked together to solve. Starting right now, I'm an extended part of your team. We will identify your challenges and give you some tools to help overcome them. If all of this sounds like you, let me know in the comments. Are you thinking about starting a business? What's holding you back? So as we step into the final part of this year, now is the time to get serious about what you want in 2026. One of the reasons I wanted to make this video was because I was struggling to find anything on YouTube that actually expressed the reality of getting started. The general advice is that you just need an amazing product, consistent visibility, and a working sales funnel. Meanwhile, you're out there thinking, how do I even figure out what a great product is, let alone build one? Clue, it doesn't even have to be a product. There are many common pain points at the start of a business, but the biggest thing that people tell me about is, drumroll please, a lack of money. But then we dig deeper, and we then often identify that the real issue is a lack of clarity, skills, and or networks. With many people struggling because they don't feel like they've got the time, the energy, or maybe they don't have the mindset and the confidence to overcome those challenges. I'm keen to know if any of this resonates with you, and let me know in the comments what your biggest barrier is so that I can make a future video to help you to tackle it. So let's start with maybe the hard truth. If you do want to start a business, you are going to have to find some space and time. You do need to prioritize it. But guess what? Congratulations! You've already carved out some time to watch this video. So right now, if possible, I encourage you to get out a notebook or maybe your Notion, start making some notes, and use this time right now to devote to prioritizing your business. If you've done that, then double congratulations. You've definitely got some of the traits that are required to build a business. Now, I don't believe that there is one specific set of traits that an entrepreneur needs to have. I have seen so many different types of people who have managed to be successful in business, and they don't all think the same way, they don't have the same set of skills, and they're not coming from the same circumstances. So the most important thing I encourage you to do is start from where you are now and really understand how that might impact your business journey. Not sure how to do that? Don't worry, we're going to do that later on in this video. When it comes to finding energy, this is something that ebbs and flows. In the early days of business, you may have to spend energy doing things that don't necessarily energize you. You don't have a team to delegate all of those tasks to. You're also probably trying to balance running that business with a whole bunch of different priorities, and probably still working in another job as you're doing it. So this might mean having to make some sacrifices in the early days. So that's why it's really important to also make sure that the work you're doing in your business energizes you. Which brings me on to our toolkit. 3 different steps to help you get clarity and to take action. The first step is to get inspired. if you're gonna go on a big adventure, you need to be able to get excited about it. So the first step is all about you finding what is going to motivate you enough to start and maintain your business. And the thing is, once you start, once you spend time, energy, money getting invested down a certain pathway, it is much, much harder to rewind if you realize you're walking totally the wrong path. So let's make sure that you're setting yourself up in the right way to make sure the business is right for you. So I'm going to quickly run through some helpful tools that I've used and that you can use to get inspiration for your future business. Let me know if you want me to do more of a deep dive of any of these in a future video. Now, you don't have to do all of these things, and perhaps you're already feeling inspired and driven and like you're on a mission, in which case you can just skip to the next part. So let's get clear on your vision. If you're a global thinker like me, you need to be able to see that big picture before you can start building up the small steps. That picture in your mind of that future is going to be a very motivating and clarifying force for you. But you might be finding it hard to land on what that thing is. But one tool that I've found really helpful in this particular case is meditation. So I've created a meditation just for you called the Paint Your Future meditation, and it'll be linked in the description below. There's also a bunch of journal prompts that are embedded into that video. So if meditation and or journaling are things that work for you or things that you want to try, then I encourage you to check that out. It's not going to give you all the answers about your business, but it's going to give you a real sense of what you'd like the future to look like for you. Vision boarding or writing a letter to yourself from the future can also be really helpful ways to do that. For some of us, we really need to just get ourselves out of the everyday in order to create that vision and get excited. So for you, it may be about creating that vision, but it also might be about finding your purpose for this business. And it's quite an old book now. Simon Sinek has a TED Talk and a book called Start With Why. And this encourages us to look at what purpose, belief, or cause is going to motivate you. You might already feel passionate and have a clear set of opinions and values that you want to embed into your business. And they might really be driving your desire to start a business in the first place. If not, I encourage you to get observant in your everyday life. Figure out when you get particularly passionate, whether that's getting into the flow with certain things, whether it's about getting angry, frustrated, excited. Those moments might help you to figure out what's going to inspire you to go on this journey. Now, there are a few words of caution here, and I'll come on to some of them in a moment, but I first of all just wanted to say, for me, this approach doesn't always work that well because I can get quite overwhelmed by it. I'm passionate about a lot of things. How do those things come together? And if I felt like I focused on any particular single mission, then I felt like I was then leaving other things behind. What I discovered is my purpose is actually around how we create successful businesses. So it wasn't so much about what the businesses were doing, although I had some things that I wanted to work on. It was more about just that process of building the business itself. Hence now, that's what I spend most of my time helping other people to do. Another great way to figure out what's going to inspire you or figure out where there might be a really brilliant business idea is to log your frustrations. This actually came from the deep dive I just did in Slack, and I found out that the Slack founder, Stuart Butterfield, does this. In his everyday life, in his businesses, in his work, he just keeps a log of the things that frustrate him, and he's like, these are problems that a business can solve. So when you're out there living your day-to-day life, doing your day job, hanging out with your friends, whatever it might be, maybe take a look at what are those frustrations that could end up actually being a business. Don't worry, I have more tips for you about how we figure out whether or not an idea is a viable one in the next section of this video. In this stage, it's also really important to continue to learn and connect. Go to events, watch content, talk to other people. Maybe do new activities if you're not doing activities already, and figure out what really lights you up. What feels good? What pulls you back in? What can't you stop thinking about? And what can this tell you about what you might show up for every day in a business? What can it tell you about what business opportunities are out there? Can you spot any patterns? And make sure you talk to real people during this stage. That is the fastest way to learn and also creates connections that might be helpful when you actually start your business. Have you heard of Ikigai? This is a Japanese concept meaning a reason for living. And I've seen it very effectively used for starting a business. And that's because it looks at you, the founder, and how you fit in the world in a very holistic way. There are 4 parts to Ikigai, and you're looking for the sweet spot in the middle. So the first part is what you love. This is your passion. What do you love spending your time, your money, your energy on? The second part is what are you good at? Your knowledge, your skills. What are you excited to develop further? The third part is what does the world need? This is the mission, something that needs to be fixed in the world. And the fourth part is what can you be paid for? Now there are 2 parts here. What will the market in general pay for? But also what do you have access to? So how can you gain access to a certain segment of a market perhaps who will pay to solve certain problems? What are they going to pay for? The most effective way to do this is to brainstorm every category and then look for the overlaps. A word of caution on using Ikigai and actually on anything related to being mission driven. Not every business is driven by a specific mission. And in fact, many missions are better suited to different types of organizations, not a startup business. But searching for the sweet spot might help you to understand what will motivate you every day. The reality is you actually only need to know what are your skills, what are you good at, and what will the world pay for. And where that overlaps is probably where you're going to be able to form a business. And don't forget, it's not just your skills, it can be the skills of other people around you as well. So from all of this, I hope you can see that getting inspired is not about being in a vacuum. You do it by living your life and getting inspired by the things that are all around you. Now, if you're still struggling to get inspired, I've certainly found myself in that place. It doesn't mean that business isn't for you or you shouldn't be starting a business, because in some ways, starting a business is a little bit like having a baby. Like, there's never going to be an exactly perfect right time to do it. But I would say, if you're not feeling excited, if you're not feeling inspired, maybe question why not. And for me, often that's because I'm feeling quite burnt out. And being burnt out isn't necessarily the best place to start a business from. Perhaps try and get a little bit healthier in your current circumstances, and then you might be ready to do it. But going through these exercises might actually help you to see that the business is the right route for you and you're excited and you've found an area that excites you and that you would want to work on. But they also might show you that there's something else that you're interested in, and there could be other organizations out there who might want to hire you, and you might have the skills to work for them on a particular mission rather than starting a business for yourself. You have to remember that entrepreneurship is not a get-rich-quick scheme at all. In fact, sometimes it's not a get-rich-slow scheme either. Employment could be a better way to fulfill your goals. And I only say that not to put you off, but because I want you to be clear about all of the realities of starting a business. And what I don't want to happen is for you to find yourself feeling like you've got all of the same pressures of being in employment when working for yourself, but you're just not taking a salary. That's not a good position to be in. So, now you've found the meaning, the inspiration in your business, it's time for us to move on to the next step. Because before you start your business, you need to make sure that you're fully informed about what it is you're leaping into. Otherwise, how can you make sure that you've got what you need, that the business has got what it needs to be successful? So, step 2 is to get informed. There are a lot of things you need to know to start and run a business. But in my opinion, before you get started, the most important things for you to understand are yourself and your own personal circumstances, the needs of your market and how you're going to get to them, and the barriers that might be standing in the way of your business. So let's start with self. As a business founder, self-awareness is one of the most important things. Without it, you might find yourself running around like a headless chicken, unable to overcome the stress and the challenges of running a business. So we're going to start by talking about a pretty personal topic, and that is your financial needs. Now, this is one of the questions I ask almost every founder that I work with in the very first session. And I know it sounds very, very personal, but it's also really important to understand where you are economically. Now, businesses can be built by founders from all economic backgrounds, but I have to be honest, it is still something that is easier to do if you already have some kind of economic advantages. Now, I was working paycheck to paycheck when I first started my business, and eventually I got to a point where I was able to buy a house from that business and become more comfortable financially. But in the beginning, a lot of the advice I was getting really didn't seem to match with my financial circumstances. It just seemed impossible to do some of the things that we were being advised to do. For example, a lot of people just assumed that you could get investment or loans from friends and family. I'm sorry, but how many of us have friends and family who are just ready to give us cash for every business idea that we might have? And then the other thing that I think is sometimes misconceived about business is that financial worries are something that make you hungry and it motivates you even more. I never found that to be true. I found it to cause additional stress, and it also means you have to make decisions based on those financial circumstances rather than making decisions that are just purely right for the business direction. And so, like I said, I'm not here to put anyone off. I just want you to be realistic about what your current financial circumstances are and how much of a runway you have. If you are still living paycheck to paycheck, then obviously until your business is bringing money in, you're going to have to continue to get money from elsewhere. And that means that you are going to have to be doing this on the side, and you're probably going to have to build the business a little bit more slowly than you would if you were able to devote full time to it. The second thing I want you to think about in terms of self-awareness are, what are your fears? What are your anxieties? What are the things that you just really don't want to do? And so for many founders, they might talk about they're afraid of sales, for example. And one of the challenges with this, again, is that you might be making decisions based on your own anxieties rather than the business needs. If you're aware of what your fears are, then you can mitigate against them. So if you say out loud, I'm scared of doing sales, I'm scared of talking to people, then actually we can start to work on that very specifically. At the end of the day, sales is ultimately just a process that you can learn and develop in a way that is right for your business. With practice, you might become good at it, your fear might decrease, and for some, they even say that sales ends up being their favorite part of the business, having been really afraid of it when they first started, because they really get to know their customers. If you really struggle with self-doubt, you might want to watch my video on building confidence. So I'll link to that in the description as well. The next thing you need to figure out for yourself is, what is your support system as you're going through this journey? Because you are going to need one. So try and figure out if there are communities that you can be a part of. Who have you got in your family and your friends? Have you got peers, mentors, coaches who can support you both in building the business and for the other parts of your life? And your support system might not just be people. It might be your routines, your rituals, the places that are comfortable to you, the things that you can come back to when the business starts to get hard. And then the final thing I want to say about self-awareness is that you need to be aware of your attitude towards risk. And this can go both ways. So some people are so excited about risk and they want to take risks and they will jump into any new adventure. That's not me. And again, this might be very determined by your own personal circumstances. You might be able to take what is apparently a bigger risk if you've got a bigger safety net. So by being aware of how risk averse you are, that will also inform you in terms of what kind of decisions you might make for the business and whether you need to push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit more, or whether you actually need to rein things in a little bit more. The most successful isn't the one where the people just willy-nilly do things spontaneously and take all the risks in the world. It's about risk mitigation. So one thing I want to say about getting informed before I move on to some specific pieces about how you can get informed about your market and your customers is that you also need to be realistic. Many people get sucked in because they think their own business is going to give them more time, more money, more freedom, when actually it might do the opposite, especially in the early days. And the time it takes to get there is often a lot longer than people expect. You can't treat this whole journey like a sprint, but you can maybe treat it like a series of sprints with some breathers in between. A HIIT class, shall we say. It's less a marathon in the sense of you do actually need to push for periods of time, but you also do need to make sure that you've built in those breaks, because it's not a case of 6 months and suddenly there'll be business success. It doesn't normally work that way, much to my surprise in my first business. I'm not saying this to scare you. Just plan for it. For me, if I'd have known this, I would have just beaten myself up less when we weren't as advanced with our technology after 3 years as I thought we were going to be. Right, now let's move on to getting informed about your business. And I have tools that I like to use with entrepreneurs on this, especially if I'm talking more generally, and then we tend to zoom in to specific sections. So one thing that a lot of people seem to miss when we're talking about business is that it's all a lovely experiment. Just a whole series of different experiments. Whether that be in trying to figure out exactly what your market needs, what your product needs to be to solve their problems, what you need to do in your marketing and your messaging. Some of it's going to work and some of it's not going to work. Now you can get more informed about that before you start the business. But you also do need to be able to treat each part of building the business as an experiment as well, which means you need to set everything up so you can learn as you go. Now, from your inspiration, you have probably already got many ideas of what types of things you might want your business to be. You might have found those lists of frustrations that you have and think, I could solve some of those problems with my business. You might have seen some other businesses out there when you've been doing your learning and going to events and thought, I'd like to do something like that, but slightly different. Put my spin on it. And I'm sure some of those ideas seem more exciting to you than others, and perhaps they fit better with your skill set and your experience and your networks. Although that is not a prerequisite for starting the business, you just need to build those things as you go. So once I've got a few ideas to play with, I like to use the business model canvas that was developed by Alexander Osterwalder. It's a tool by the company Strategizer, and it's essentially a business plan on a page. So your business model canvas has all of these different sections in it. So to start with, all I want you to do is just write down your ideas, but put them into those different sections of the business model canvas. I really like to do this with actual pieces of paper and post-it notes, or in a whiteboard type app like the Canva whiteboard. And I want you to just put your best guesses on what is it that you're gonna offer, what value can you offer to those customers? Who are the customers that you're selling to? What channels are you going to reach them by? Who are you going to partner with? What is it that your business is actually going to do? And then how are you going to make money through doing it? Once you've got those guesses written out, just see if that all makes sense across the whole canvas. And this begins the starting point for your information gathering. This is not the end point of your business idea. This is the beginning. Because what you've actually done is created a set of assumptions about what might work for a business. And so you need to then go and test those assumptions. Now, there is a good order to do this, because one side of the canvas is all about market demand. Does the market actually need the business that you're thinking about? The other side is all about how you will fulfill that demand with the business. So there's not really much point looking at how you're going to do the fulfillment if you don't yet know if there is going to be any demand at all from the market. So do your target customers actually have the kind of problems that you think that they have? Maybe it's a problem that you have and you're assuming that other people like you are going to have the same kind of challenges. That's a fairly good starting assumption, but it's not enough to make you confident about starting a business. So there is no point actually building a solution that is going to solve those problems until you really understand that those problems exist and they are big enough essentially for somebody to pay to solve them. So again, this is about what we call getting out of the building. So you need to somehow test whether or not these problems are big enough. There are certain ways you could do this at home. So things like social media, Reddit and things like that will give you some understanding as to whether these problems exist. There might be things like articles in the news or even industry reports that might give you a more of a kind of headline sense of challenges. They're good for seeing how big this market is and how big you might be able to grow. They're not so good necessarily for really understanding if everyday people have this problem. And I should say those everyday people might be people online who might be buying something from you, but they might also be people in big businesses, in corporates, in organizations, or in startups who you want to provide your service to. And if you go back and watch my Slack video, I talk there a little bit about why I think they were successful in their early days and who they chose to sell to in the early days and how they understood their customers, ultimately because they'd had the same challenges. So testing your assumptions, really, really important. But do this quickly. Get snappy about it. Get out there. You don't have to do a full-on scientific experiment to do this. You just have to be amongst the people who are having the kind of problems that you think they might be having. Just by getting out there and talking to them, or just by understanding their behavior more by observing them, you will start to understand whether or not what you're thinking is the right thing or not. And often it's not, and that's when we need to pivot. But that's fine, because you've done all of this without spending money on creating a product, without even having to launch a business yet. And if you're struggling to think, how am I going to get to know my customers? Then this is a really important question for you to answer, because you are going to need to know them in order to sell to them. And again, this might be online or it might be more face-to-face and in real life. So speaking of markets, if you don't have a market, as in a group of people with shared characteristics who are going to buy from you, then you don't have a business. But not all markets look the same or act the same. So it's really important for you to understand your target market more. So not just the individuals, but what's going on in terms of what we would call market forces. Are there certain trends that mean that you're more or less likely to get more or less customers? Again, in the Slack video, I gave this as an example because Slack's revenue grew a lot during the pandemic, because Slack is a platform that is used to connect teams online. So obviously, when suddenly nobody was in the office, people were looking for more tools to help them to connect online. That would be an example of a market force in action. The opposite part of that is if your market is even ready for your kind of business, and are you going to have to do a lot of what we call market education in order to get them to be ready to buy. So for example, my first business was selling software, including virtual reality software, to the education market. And this was in 2014. So even now it would be very, very tough to do that. We ended up pivoting into the space of university research and pharmaceuticals. But it took me too long to get there. And the reason it did is because the individuals in the schools loved what we were doing. They could see that it made a difference. It was very positive. However, that is not proof that there is a market that exists that will actually buy the product. Because if the real selling point is virtual reality, how many schools have a virtual reality lab, headset, whatever, for example? And you might go, that's obvious. But at the time, we were like, well, maybe the market will change. Maybe things will shift. So at the time, we had to do that testing. And like I said, I wish I'd done it more rapidly so that we pivoted more rapidly. If you want to simplify all that, you can just Google things to do with the market or the business you're thinking about building. You can look at social media or industry reports, like I mentioned before. But actually, this is where I also really, really value going to events within a certain sector, because you're going to learn so much about that industry and make connections at the same time. And again, these are all things you can do before you start your business, before you invest any money into it, albeit a little bit of time and energy. Now, I've often said you really need to fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve in your business. But before you get started, I do want you to be having some idea of that solution and whether or not that solution is the right approach to solving the problem, but also what you're going to need in terms of resources to create that solution. Now, you can't predict the future. Things will definitely change over time. But in this stage, you can look at what already exists out there and how are you going to make a difference. And it needs to be compelling enough for people to actually make a change, which often requires you to be pretty different, actually, quite a lot better or a lot cheaper. You need to figure out, is there space for a new product and how much it's likely to cost you in order to develop that product. This varies so much depending on the sector, the product, the positioning, and your job as an entrepreneur is to figure this all out. Now, you're not going to do all of this before you start your business, but the more you can think about in terms of how are we going to differentiate, how can we make a difference to what's already out there on the market, and what do we need to do that, the more ready you're going to be to launch your business. So going through all of these steps, getting yourself informed will help you to identify both personal barriers and business barriers. And if all of that feels like a lot, I'm going to make future videos on each section here so that we can start to really get into how you might go about achieving each of these things. So, once you know where you're going, how you're going to get there, you actually have to start gathering the resources required to get you there. And in the early days, a lot of these resources are going to come straight from you as the founder. So before you press go on the business, I want you to start thinking like your business's first investor. Because guess what? That's what you are. If you are putting time, money, energy into your business, you need to be thinking about what will the return be on that investment. So here are some questions that are going to help you start to think like an investor. Are you investing in the right things right now? For example, there's no point putting money into building a big team if you haven't figured out yet what it is that your market will actually pay for. Question 2, what are the gaps in your team? And what would need to happen to fill those gaps? Every single point in this whole video could be a whole coaching session, at least. But this question is a very big one. The most important thing, if you've got gaps in your team, is to really immerse yourself in the market. That way you'll start to find the right people around you. Maybe they're people who become advisors or co-founders. They might become customers, or they might become team members, and you'll be able to pay for them when you bring in income. Question 3, is there enough evidence, and this really goes back to the getting informed, have you gathered enough evidence that the market needs, wants, and will pay for what you have? Now, I have a scientific background, and for me, enough evidence would probably take me so long to gather that I would never start a business. So word of caution here, figure out what enough means. You need to be confident as the investor that your investments are going to have a return. Does the evidence you have give you that confidence? That's how you answer that question. Related to that, are you investing too heavily in product right now? I've worked with some entrepreneurs who just keep building and building and building new features, refinements, AI add-ons, everything. But what for? When they don't currently have customers who are using or buying that product. And honestly, if you haven't even started your business yet, the only thing you really need to be thinking about on a product and service perspective is, what is it I can offer that's going to fulfill that customer need? We talk a lot about minimal viable product. And that's really about stripping things right back to what is the minimum thing you can do that customer is going to pay for ultimately. Usually pay for. Sometimes your minimum viable product might be something that they are users on rather than paying customers. And maybe that's something we can dig into in a later video. But you might also find that actually the first thing you need to do with customers, or the easiest way to work with customers, is to build out service propositions. And so then you can create packages that you're then going to deliver to those customers. But they're also probably going to adapt and evolve in those early months or years. They are going to evolve over that time. Don't invest so heavily in it that you've got nothing left to continue to run the business, whether that be energy or whether that be money. An important investor question: financially, what is required to get you to the next, what we would call, value inflection point of the business? So if you are planning on growing your business organically, so that means without external funding, then what is it you're going to need to spend in order to get your product or your service ready enough for people to start paying for it? Now, for most people watching on here, I'm sure that you can build businesses just investing into some software and a lot of passion and skill and energy and your own time. I work a lot with deep tech businesses, and for many of them, they will go for many years before they're able to bring money into the company. So that's where they need to be asking for external investment. But even if you're getting investment elsewhere, you still need to be thinking like an investor yourself. So is the time, energy, money that you're putting in worth it? And one way you can answer that question is to say, are you being optimistically realistic, as one of my fellow entrepreneurs in residence says? So what that means is when you start to forecast where your business is going, and so that's thinking about how much money you might be able to bring in, are you being realistic about that? But also with a little bit of optimism and hopefulness, because you really do need to be a little bit optimistic to keep things moving. And that not only goes for the money that you're potentially bringing in, that's also the money that might be going out of the business. And then the final question might be a really hard one. Are you the right person to lead this business? What skills, knowledge, experience, network do you need to develop to make sure you are, if you want to be? And do you have the support systems, motivations, and resilience to see it through? So in summary, business is not an easy ride. It takes a lot of physical and emotional resources, but it can also come with great rewards. And that's why it's so important to focus on what motivates you or lights you up. Write down your assumptions about the business and test them before you spend a lot of money, time, or energy on your business. And reputation. Don't forget about your professional reputation as well. Keep grounding yourself in your own reality. Would you still be doing this if you knew your business would fail in a year's time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? Would you still be doing this if you had to keep working in this way for an extra 6 months, year, 3 years? Unfortunately, that is the reality of business. It can be exciting, but at the same time, it is a lot of hard work. Do you have what you need to keep that going? Now, a business can be a very emotionally grueling journey, which is why I put so much emphasis on self-awareness. Now, that alone will not overcome all the barriers, but it will mean that you're stepping into this adventure with your eyes wide open and constructing a business that is likely to work better for you. See, you are the one thing that you actually have control over. Markets, on the other hand, well, we've already discussed that. So don't forget to let me know where you are in your business journey. Are you just thinking about it, or are you already testing out your idea and putting plans in place? If so, amazing. Let's continue to do this together. Today, we've talked about the things you need to do if you're thinking about starting a business. But stay tuned to find out how you actually do the starting of the business, and then what to do in your first 100 days. I'll be dropping those videos in time for the new year. And so if that's interesting to you, don't forget to press the subscribe button and the notification bell, and let me know any other questions you have in the comments. See you soon. Bye.